Kia ora and welcome to Talking Dairy. I'm your host, Jack McGowan from DairyNZ. It's so good to have you with us. We all know how demanding dairy farming can be, but why is it that some farms seem to be running smoothly with shorter hours and stronger teams, while others feel stuck on the treadmill even with similar herd sizes or systems? That's the question DairyNZ researchers have been digging into. First with a workplace productivity study across 150 farms, and now through an in-depth look at 10 very different farms to better understand what makes the biggest difference. Joining me are two of the people leading this work, Dr. Lucy Hall, a postdoctoral scientist, and Brian Dela, a research engineer at DairyNZ. They've been getting right under the hood of how time is used on farm, what drives workplace productivity, and how we can use that insight to work smarter, not harder. Whether you're looking to free up weekends, improve team culture, or get more value from the hours you're already putting in, there's something in this chat for you. Tēnā korua, Lucy and Brian. It's great to have you both here. Now, to kick things off, can you each give us a quick introduction about who you are and what's your role at DairyNZ? We'll go with you, Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy. As Jack said, I'm a postdoctoral scientist. I'm based in Lincoln, so I'm 2 years out of my PhD. I work in the workplace productivity team, and I might be a familiar voice or a familiar name to a couple of people in the Deep South, having run discussion groups down there for a few years and a bit of farming.
Thanks, Lucy. And how about you, Brian?
I'm a research engineer scientist in our science team in Hamilton. I've been involved in projects on-farm technology adoption and workplace productivity, going way back to working with you, Jack McGowan, on robotic milking on pasture a long time ago.
Let's not talk about how long that was.
Yeah, and also projects with cow wearables and in-shed technologies. And recently a cool project with ACC on reducing sprains and strains on dairy farms. So we won a National Health and Safety Prize with that. So I really want to shout out to farmers who really supported us and tested out a lot of prototypes on farm.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, you do get involved in some of the coolest work. Always jealous. Can you give us a bit of a background to this program of work and why it's important?
Yes, the overall goal of the research program is to support farmers in improving workplace productivity and attractiveness. This is important because many farmers are having trouble recruiting capable people, and hours of work is part of that issue. So the impact of different approaches on reducing hours required to run the farm is of real interest. So workplace productivity on dairy farms is plateaued at around 150 cows per FTE, full-time equivalent on average. And our industry target is to improve productivity by 30% over the next 10 years.
Which would take it to how many cows?
That's about 180, but if that's the metric we use. We're also looking at some different metrics which may be better at describing productivity. We've already done a diverse range of projects leading up to the workplace productivity case studies. As you mentioned, we've surveyed 150 farms to get a wider view of hours required to run farms, of different types of farms. We've previously surveyed and interviewed farmers on the adoption of technology, including milk tech, wearables and virtual fencing, and different practices like reduced milking frequencies like 3 and 2, 10 and 7, and milking efficiency tactics, max T. So moving forward, we will work with farmers to see if we can stack up some of the benefits of those various approaches to improve workplace productivity and attractiveness, and where we can possibly add some emerging technologies, possibly things like AI tools for decision making.
Thank you. And Lucy, what were you hearing from farmers or seeing in the data that made you think, we need to dig deeper here?
The productivity surveys that you mentioned before, Jack, that we rolled out in 23-24 with QCons, so some listeners may have been part of that. And I was just involved in kind of looking at the data sets, so got a whole bunch of information back from QCons, which was super interesting. It was run across the country, so there was an absolutely wide array of kind of farm systems. We asked them about their farm management, et cetera, and also about their hours that they and their team were working. So we could kind of put together that kind of figure of how many hours overall these guys were working on farm, and then could kind of plot it against kind of farm size to see how many hours different farms were working of similar sizes. And what we did see was there was quite a lot of differences, quite large differences between farms of similar sizes across the hours that they worked. So I guess we were really interested to, as you said, dig a little deeper, find out a bit more information around specific periods, a little bit more about the why of why these guys might have been working more or less hours. We were also interested in capturing real-time data. So the QCons guys just kind of saw these guys once and reflecting on, how many hours do you work over calving when you're in February isn't always the best way to collect accurate data. So yeah, we kind of took a much smaller sample size this time, but dug a bit deeper, which produced some really interesting results for us.
Okay, so the survey was like a really good starting point. You mentioned a huge variation in hours worked. How big a variation are you talking?
Nearly double in some cases, a little bit smaller in other cases, quite a large array.
So there's room to move potentially.
Yeah, if that's what people are working towards, then potentially yes.
So now you've moved into this next phase of research, which involved case studies with 10 farms across different systems and regions. Can you tell us more about why you chose these farms and what information you collected with them?
Well, we've identified those 10 farms that were using just different ranges of practices or technologies. They're doing things that might reduce hours of work, but also improve work-life balance for the farm team. So we, like Lucy said, we just did the 10 farms because it was going to be pretty intensive to look at the hours worked on these farms. We visited them each farm at 5 times during the season: peak calving, peak mating, mid-lactation, late lactation, and the dry period. So we mapped out what typical days looked like for the farm team in 15-minute blocks and accounted for days where there were different hours, like weekends, or different numbers of people on deck on those days, trying to get sort of sensible hours for the week under 7 task categories and about 35 task codes.
Wow.
The main task categories were milking, animal care, feed, people, farm and equipment, office, and off-farm tasks like runoff work, etc. So, we were really appreciative of the time and the insights that those farmers gave us on a very busy time. So it was a really good opportunity to learn more about their farms.
Okay, give us an overview of the farms.
Yeah, so for the Waikato Bay of Plenty farms, we had herd size ranging from 235 to 550 cows. 4 of the 5 farms were milking through herringbone dairies. 3 of the farms were twice a day milking. 1 was mostly a one-person operation, and they were in the first year of extended lactation, where half the herd will calve each spring to reduce the spring workload. The second had 2 people operating the farm, and so such that the owner-operator could still take time off for his passion of hunting and fishing during the season. And sometimes these passion projects can really drive productivity on farms, that need to get off and make sure your system's robust enough to be able to do that. The third was a twice-a-day farm, was running nearly 500 cows and used the halter system to reduce hours. The remaining 2 farms are once a day all season, both around 500 cows, and not raising any young stock. One of those farms is using halter to improve grazing on the contour where only about 15% could be mowed for silage, so it's quite steep. And this farm also focuses on sociable hours of work. So their start time is 7 a.m. to make recruitment easier. And previously, they'd been starting at 8 a.m. so they could use casual labour, like mums dropping their kids off at school, to milk for them as well. So they really have a focus on those working hours.
And Lucy, do you want to talk about the farms that you worked with?
Sure, yeah. So I had 5 farms down in the South Island, so 1 on the West Coast and 3 in Canterbury. So it probably won't be a surprise that they were slightly larger farms than we see up in Waikato. So my smallest was 480 cows up to 800 cows. So I think that was important for us to kind of capture those larger farms that had a few more team members on them. We dealing with more people management, more rosters, all those kind of things as well. So they had a variety of milking frequencies that we see down here in Canterbury. So I had 2 3-and-2 farms, a 10-and-7 farm, a full season once a day and a full season twice a day. So the full spectrum of milking frequencies and full variety of kind of age and stage. So new farm owners to kind of more established businesses to those that are more corporate owned, equity partners, those kind of setups. So that was something we were also interested in capturing. And then also, as Brian said before, bigger rotary milking sheds, which really makes a difference for those milking efficiency kind of metrics. So, and a couple with tech on as well. So a halter and an all flex farm. So yeah, lots going on.
Did anything really interesting stand out to you from the farms that you were researching with?
One farm in particular stood out in my area. They're having around half the hours required to run the farm throughout the whole season compared to the other 4 farms I visited. And they were quite upfront about this, not really a model farm for lots of other farmers to follow, but there's some attributes about the way they work that are common to other farms as well. So it's really worth us having a bit of a closer look at that one. So I'll just give you a bit of an overview of how they run their particular farm. So they operate a really simple farm system. They're milking 550 cows at peak through a 40-bale herringbone once a day all season, and they manage the cows as one herd, apart from colostrum cows. More mobs equals more jobs. The reason for the once a day was that the owner didn't want to be locked into himself milking twice a day, just wanted more flexibility. And also the alternative, if he wasn't doing it, was to employ another person, and that really didn't fit. It's a really lean farm team. There's the owner plus one full-time farm worker, and with the owner's partner covering the calf rearing and the business admin. Around 90% of the feed is pasture, 10% imported feed, 24-hour grazing, no hay or silage made on the farm. There's very little tech, but the farm was converted about 10 years ago, so they have modern facilities. No AB, all mating to Hereford bulls. No replacements raised. They buy in mixed-age cows, but they do rear about 150 beef calves for sale at the end of October. They have a real focus on efficiency. A key driver for the owner, one of these passion things again, is he wants to ride his horse in daylight. And that's a good driver for making sure things get done. He also takes like an 80-20 approach to the way they work in terms of hours and outcomes. So it understands or believes that you could otherwise spend a lot of time chasing some small gains. As I said, they have a really lean team that work really low hours, and they're operating around 250 cows per FTE. But if you have a lean team, you have to have available cover for time off. Some other farms kind of employ a bit of a buffer to cover all those time off for other people on farm. In this case, real lean, and they'll just bring in people as required because they have access to them. The owner sets the rate of work. He would often say to me that he wants to smash the work out. So really high work rate. His whole view is just get it done and take a break. Even over the calving period, they'll finish all core tasks by lunchtime, apart from, checking springers, etc. Another key feature of the efficiency and productivity on the farm is rapid decision-making. There is no committee meetings around what needs to be done. It's identified opportunities or issues and they're action straight away. Also has a fix-it-now approach. Each bike has a full toolkit. If you see something needs repair and you're able to, you repair it right there and then. So there's no leaving things behind, finding out problems later on. Maybe the only limitation would be that with a 40-bale herringbone, it requires 2 people to milk. But they're really efficient and they're milking around 275 cows per hour at peak milk. Another advantage they have with the once a day is that it allows the farm worker to take a lot of afternoons off if they want to, half days off. They've done most of the work by the end of milking or just after, so it really creates a lot more flexibility as well. So overall, the farm always looks really good. The dairy is spotless, so there's no major shortcuts taken. But we kind of wanted to have a look and see, is there a bit of a trade-off between running the farm this way and farm profitability? Often people will think, if you do it working once a day, maybe you could have done more, etc. But when we look at the dairy base numbers for this particular farm, and they are last year's numbers, we don't have the latest ones right now, we found that milk solids was down 7% compared to the local benchmark farms. This farm's a little bit hillier than some of the local ones, and that's mostly due to lower pasture and crop harvested. But operating cost was down about 30% compared to those other ones, and that's mostly due to a really low labour cost and also low feed costs as well. So overall, operating profit was up around 45%. So, I look at that and thinking, you've got a pretty good work-life balance there going on, but also the profitability is sitting up there nicely too. So a different way of taking on the challenge of farming. The farmer himself, 10 years into dairy and probably not burdened by traditional ways of doing things and expectations, and just looking at the job and saying, how can I do a great job? What do I need to do to make it work?
It's always interesting to see how people who've come into dairy from somewhere else bring quite a different approach. I've got a couple of questions for you, Brian. You mentioned that he uses the 80-20 rule a lot. Were there any things that they didn't apply that rule to?
It was generally the case. Overall appearance of the farm indicated that some things were non-negotiables. Another point in terms of simplicity is that when the owners would go away, set really realistic and easy to achieve expectations of the farm worker when setting out paddocks to be grazed, etc. He just want to make sure there was plenty of feed for the cows and there was water in the troughs. And if those things went well while he was away, he was happy enough with that and he'd deal with any residuals that didn't meet his standard afterwards. So I think, just having a realistic approach to don't create complexity, which could create more problems sometimes.
You also mentioned that the farmer didn't feel they were a model for others. Why is that?
I guess it's not rearing their own young stock and just buying in mixed-age cows. Not everyone's going to be able to do that. And it's interesting, I think farmers, quite a few of the ones that I was visiting, underplay how good they are at what they're doing and the good decisions they're making. Almost embarrassed to tell you how much time off they have when they're getting off farm. And I'm thinking, you're doing the right thing. You're working hard. Like, one of them was like, actually, I work 7 days a week. So, if I need a bit of a nap in midweek when I can, I'll have to do that. And if I need to get off farm and take some time out, I'll make sure I can get that done too.
Okay. And Lucy, do you want to tell us about a farm that stood out to you?
Yeah, totally. So they were all super interesting, but I think if we talked about all five, then we might be here all day. So I'll just pick the one, which was actually the largest farm that we had in the study with 800 cows. Like Brian said before, I guess this stood out to us in terms of the cows per FTE running around 230 cows per FTE, so quite a lot higher than our average through dairy base, which is currently 150. But also what is quite an awesome figure for these guys is they average a 42-hour week for all their team members across the season. So, yeah, real impressive hours worked. So these guys utilised 3-2 milking. They were a 3-2 farm and aligned their rosters nicely with their milking frequency, which is something we often hear about 3-2 is it's a bit of a pain in the ass with those kind of fluctuating milking times and over the weeks being a little bit different. So they ran a 6-2 roster, which is really nice for their team because you get those 3 earlies and those 3 mids, and that makes things quite straightforward to manage. They had quite modern infrastructure. So we're on a farm that we're doing a lot of R&M, which probably works in their favour a little bit, but also not a high-tech farm. They didn't have collars on last season. The kind of outstanding element was their people management. And this wasn't the only farm that was doing this in our case studies. There was a couple, but these guys were nailing it as well. So they had a daily catch-up with their team, so little morning meetings every day over coffee just to kind of align those tasks so there were no kind of sitting on hands or wandering around. What are you going to do with your time? And also a strong kind of, as they put it, home by 5 mentality. A couple of them had small children, so just kind of getting home to their family was really important to them. And they made sure that happened, which was really cool to see. And the 3-2, I guess, gave them a little bit of flexibility with in terms of if you needed to go and pick your mum up from the airport or, had a sports game or something along those lines. They had a team that was large enough and that flexibility with the 3-2 to kind of make that happen, which was quite interesting because it resulted in them actually, the problem was that they didn't take a lot of leave, the team members, which we quite often associate as, if that's a figure just used by itself, like how much leave do you have accrued by your team members? We think, that's a bad thing because these guys don't have time to take leave. When in fact the opposite was true and these guys were kind of feeling well enough rested and had the flexibility within their week to get a few things done, that leave wasn't a problem. So I think that comes back to that conversation around digging a little bit deeper and using the right metrics and finding out a bit of the why behind it, because sometimes you can make assumptions about what the story is, and for these guys they were doing a great job. And then, as Brian mentioned before, I guess the next question is always, well, that's all well and good, but are these guys a profitable business? So obviously in terms of kgs of milk solid per cow or per hectare, they were a little bit down on when you're comparing them to mid-Canterbury, which is, a pretty high production area in itself. They were a little bit down using 3-2, which is not surprising. But in terms of their farm working expenses, like a couple of cents lower than the mid-Canterbury benchmarks. So bang on with, you wouldn't call them an overspending farm at all, and a healthy operating profit as well. So I think it's really nice to see that these kind of farms that are using strategies to kind of reduce their hours and have a work-life balance are also not blowing out the budget and are doing well in terms of their profitability.
Can I just add a comment around technology use? So the farmers we were visiting certainly value technology in terms of how it can reduce stress, save time, etc. But one of the farmers had identified unintended consequence, and that's something as an industry we need to think about. Having something like Halter and or other technologies, during sort of later lactation, they were finding that there wasn't all that many hours left for the farm workers to keep their hours up. So the technologist was doing a great job, but the team didn't have the skills to doing other repairs and maintenance, other jobs like that. So I think we need to start to adapt to saying, if we're creating more time, either for time off or for more work, have we got the skills to really get value from that time? So I think we need to really think about the training side of things and what we want. Or potentially you could look the other way and saying maybe you change the hours of the season where you are working higher hours when there's lots of work and less hours when there isn't. But that's got to work for both parties.
I mean, that sounds like an opportunity to me, Brian, like to have the time to upskill your employees so that, they can do R&M in the low time, but also fill in when you do have plenty of work.
That's absolutely right. And I think that was even on the once a day farm, they were doing a lot of hours that weren't the core tasks. Because they had time available, the farm worker wanted the hours and had the skills to do a lot of repairs and maintenance and fencing and other things like that. So it was real value to the farm.
And I'm sure it would serve the employee as they move on afterwards.
Absolutely. And just on some of our metrics of how do we measure and compare things, if you just looked at hours worked per week on the farm, wildly variable, highly related to how many cows you've got. So then we looked at hours per week per 100 cows. So we could look across farms to see, okay, for the same ratio, how are they getting on? And that allowed us to plot up some, we found some obvious differences just looking at that. But one of the obvious differences that we could see was that those farms that had available hours were doing far more. They were doing that repairs and maintenance and other jobs. So we weren't quite comparing apples with apples on those hours either. So we also plotted up hours per week per 100 cows just for the core tasks relating to milking, relating to animal care and relating to feed. And then when we had a look at it, it sort of really gave us a better opportunity to say, now how well are these farms comparing when we look across them? We could see from that, like just for four of my farms, excluding the low hours farms, there was massive variation around peak calving between about 30 and 60 hours per week for 100 cows just for those core tasks. And that's all about how they operate and what the procedures are around peak calving. We've got to be careful not to think that's inefficient. You need to drill down a bit because some of them were intentionally investing that time in their calves and in their colostrum cows. So, it's an opportunity to say, where are we sitting with our hours and do we still believe it's value? When I looked across the rest of the season, those farms look very similar. Something like peak mating, about 23 hours per 100 cows for those core tasks. I think it was 17 mid-lactation, around something like that, and getting down to about 6 hours per 100 cows when you get down to the dry period. So it's an opportunity to work the right metrics out, to pull out the details, and it's going to be really important for us if we want to monitor progress we make over years, that we're actually measuring things that we can compare between farms or see the differences when a new approach is taken.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Are there any other learnings that have emerged across the season?
For us, one of the key things that jumped out was infrastructure and how that can be a help or a hindrance to each farm. So one of the examples of the farms that I was looking at was using reduced milking time and also had halter on their farm, but had a shed that required 2 people at least to be in at all times. So the main task then became milking over the day and still quite extended times in comparison to other farms. And I guess finding those team members that wanted to be milking as their main task every day was also a little bit of a challenge for them. So yeah, those kind of the integration of infrastructure and the learnings that we came out there were quite interesting. Brian, did you have some farms that infrastructure was a challenge with?
Yeah, I think just the advantage of good infrastructure. Like one of the farms, when I asked about some of those tasks like effluent spreading, says, no, we're pretty good there. We've got a good size, really good size effluent pond. It means we don't have to be spreading effluent regularly. So it just gives them more options to move their workload around a bit more. Feed pads is probably another one where you can reduce, if you're feeding a reasonable amount of supplement, then you've got opportunity to do that quite efficiently as well. The other thing that pointed out by a couple of farmers, and one was on the wish list, I guess, is the smaller investments like that you might use daily, like automatic yard wash, and particularly around automated plant wash. Sometimes there's a bit of waiting around for that process. Now, there hasn't been a lot of investment in automated plant wash systems yet, but maybe that's an area when the justification's there that could make a bit of a difference if you're milking.
Yeah, I guess the tech is an interesting point as well with those. Obviously, we had the halter and the Allflex farms that we had there, which is always an interesting talking point. And people are always interested to know what we're seeing there. So I guess the farms that did have automated heat detection over the kind of mating period, you could definitely see a difference versus the guys that were, in a rotary shed and having to have a specific person sit up there every milking to do their heat detection is a big time crunch. It's not only kind of mentally a bit stressful, but also it's another person, another early morning that people are doing that we could see in the hours that they're working. A little bit of a difference, I guess, when you're comparing to a herringbone shed where you might already have two people in it and they're doing heat detection whilst they're milking. Yeah, it was a little bit more of a hard to pull out the time differences there. But yeah, we could certainly, when you're comparing rotaries with rotaries, you could see those differences.
The other ones that I'd add, I'm just scribbling down a few thoughts. The weather makes a massive difference on hours worked on farm. Now,
really?
Yeah, most of that's out of our hands, but sometimes you can mitigate some of that with infrastructure and equipment, perhaps. Milking frequency is a really big lever, and we saw that example with the once-a-day farm, but also just 3 and 2, 10 and 7 opportunities to reduce hours.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though. It's like it creates an opportunity, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee, right? I think that's the key point is like I had some once-a-day farmers that were owner-operators and man, were they smashing out some other tasks during their free, in inverted commas, afternoon. It provides the opportunity to reduce hours, but if you're doing other things, doesn't mean you're going to get there.
Interesting, you talked about rate of work, and that came up with a few farmers pointing out that, particularly the owner-operators who are working in the business, hands-on in the business every day, they're saying, hours don't tell the whole story. Rate of work and effectiveness at doing tasks, multitasking, etc., makes a big difference. And they see that with good farm workers picking that up really quickly and less experienced ones just not being very efficient. And that takes time and training to get that right. So rate of work is quite different. Owner-operators work hard and fast and expect that of their workers too quite often. Further one, which Lucy, you could probably comment more on with your farm teams, was good communication and organisation. We know it's always at the top of the employee survey list of things that would really make a difference on farms in terms of efficiency. I found that most of my farmers were owner-operators and they're having shoulder-to-shoulder discussions over milking, etc., not having formal meetings and organisational things, catching up a lot during the day. But I think your farms were a little different being bigger.
Yeah, like I kind of talked about in the farm example, those quick catch-ups. But also what stood out to me was the time it actually takes when you've got a few team members for the person who's managing those team members to kind of sort rosters and holiday days and sick days and, especially if you're utilising part-time workers as well, of how to fit that picture in when people want time off. So that can take up more time than you think. And I also think there's a kind of a point around happy teams and longevity in the industry as well. So that was a focus for one of my farms, was providing that kind of training and encouraging kind of longevity in the industry. They're also very proud of encouraging kind of pride in their farm. So spending some time tidying up, but there's no metric for tidiness and I don't know if we'll ever get there. So that's something which we also kind of discussed, which would be really interesting, I guess. Maybe something for us to look at in the future is that big picture of it might not always be about hours, but are we getting team members that are then continuing on into other jobs?
This all sounds incredibly interesting and promising. We know change takes time. What's the next phase of this work?
Well, at the moment, we're sort of just finalising the data we have, and we'll be sharing those learnings in Inside Dairy and in more detail in our DairyNZ website, so you can have a look out for that. And we're hoping that this sort of information can just help farmers consider some of those levers that might just work for them. We also have a current project looking at developing, as I mentioned before, a suite of metrics that are better describe workplace productivity and attractiveness, so we can more accurately track progress and hopefully automatically track progress rather than having to do intensive studies to understand where things are at. But from this work, the next stage is really to sort of work with farmers to co-design high productivity workplaces that sort of pull a lot of this together, what we've learned in these sort of studies, but in previous ones as well. And then the goal would be to demonstrate how these work in practice and see if we can stack those efficiencies and productivity gains from different things together to make a bigger impact. As well, we're sort of continuing some other projects. We have a study that Lucy's heavily involved in on workload and fatigue on farms with farm workers and using smartwatches to record data over the season. We have a quick look at available AI-based tools that may help in decision-making. And we have a small project later in the season measuring the ergonomics of cupping in a rotary. So we want to know, can we reduce milking times while maintaining milker comfort? So we have to look at things like cupping speed, cupping technique, and the impact on people, their muscles and people fatigue in doing that. So there's a few things going on, a lot of small projects that come together to add a little bit more to the project.
Okay, so Lucy, for anyone listening who's wondering what they could do to increase workplace productivity on their farm, where should they start and where can they go to learn more?
In this study, we've found that 40 to 60% of the day is taken up by milking. So milking is a great place to start if you're looking at increasing your workplace productivity and decreasing your hours worked. So there's lots of milking efficiency tools and information on the DairyNZ website. Also mapping your day, so basically going through the process that Brian talked about earlier around where are you spending your time and figuring out any sticking points that might be in there, because I think it was a little bit of an eye-opener to some farmers about where they're spending their time, and especially if you've got a larger team as well, how that all kind of adds up. So there's some great resources on the DairyNZ website. If you put in productive workplaces to the search, there's a great page that pops up with all sorts of resources and tools and information that you can go through there. There is also a 6-step challenge workplace efficiency booster that is on the DairyNZ website. And then if you're specifically interested in kind of the team culture, team building, our colleague Jane Muir did a fantastic episode with you, Jack, about building a high-performing team, which is a podcast, episode 102, I believe. So that's all coming. We are going to add some more details to the website about the case studies in particular, which will be coming up. And we've also had a section in the latest Inside Dairy. So you might actually recognize the farm that I talked to on the podcast. So yeah, I guess just to sum up the key themes that we've learned and discussed throughout these case studies that we've seen provide workplace productivity increases and decrease in hours have been infrastructure, that kind of communication, organisation and engagement of your team, milking frequency, which can be a really major one to pull if you're interested in doing that, mating strategies and technology use. So there's a suite of options out there if you're interested in doing that.
Thank you, Lucy. And thanks both of you, Lucy and Brian, for joining us and giving us this interesting update on your research from the Workplace Productivity Study. What's clear from the research is that there's plenty of ways to make small or big improvements in workplace productivity, no matter your system or your priorities, and that those small changes can add up to big gains. We are looking forward to seeing more as this research progresses. To learn more about this work, as Lucy said, head to dairynz.co.nz/productivity-study. And we've also linked to everything mentioned in this episode in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Talking Dairy. Mō ora, mā te wā. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Talking Dairy. Make sure to hit follow so you can keep up to date with our latest episodes. You can also keep up with DairyNZ News on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn, or go to our website and sign up for our fortnightly DairyNZ News emails. As always, if you have any feedback on this podcast or have some ideas for future topics or guests to have on the show, please email us at talkingdairy@dairynz.co.nz. Mā te wā, mō ora, catch you next time.